Structure of the respiratory system. The nasal cavity. The main function of the nasal cavity is to act as the main passageway for the airflow entering the lungs. The nasal cavity also filters the incoming air, regulates temperature, and humidifies the nasal passage to aid the filtering function. The epiglottis. The main function of the epiglottis is to prevent foods and drinks from falling down the airway. The epiglottis is located at the entrance of the larynx. The opening between the vocal folds is known as the glottis, and the epiglottis works as a tight seal on the glottis. The pharynx. The main function of the pharynx is it is a passageway for both air and food. The pharynx also receives the food in the digestive system after being swallowed and pushes it to the esophagus. This part of the body also aids in equalization of the air pressure in the middle ear and in the production of sound through the vocal cords. The larynx. The larynx is a muscular and cartilaginous structure that holds the vocal cords. This body organ is used by human beings to breathe, talk and swallow. The larynx is lined with mucous membrane and forms part of the respiratory system. The trachea. The main function of the trachea is to allow inhaled air to travel into and out of the lungs, to and from the atmosphere. It also plays a significant role in the smooth functioning of the digestive system, as it ensures that the food one swallows travels well down to the stomach. The bronchus. The main function of the bronchus is to allow the passage of air through it. The bronchus is also known to help in the prevention of infection by preventing pathogens from going further into the lungs. The bronchioles. The main function of the bronchioles is to allow passage of air freely into the lungs. Besides allowing air to pass, the bronchioles also prevent infections. There are a lot of diseases of the bronchi which can cause breathing problems. The lungs. The pleural membrane or cavity is the space found between the lungs' two pleura. It is a serous membrane that folds back onto itself in order to create a structure of two-layered membrane. It is defined in dentistry as the lesion made by the caries. The thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity includes the heart, trachea, lungs, esophagus, thymus, glands, aorta and pulmonary artery. The thoracic cavity is protected by the thoracic wall. This area can be damaged from an injury to the back, spine or neck. The visceral pleura. The lungs are covered in a thin serous membrane known as the pleura. The delicate pleura consists of two parts, the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura. While the outer parietal pleura attaches to the chest wall, the inner visceral pleura cover the lungs directly, extending deep down to the fissures. The main function of this smooth membrane is to allow the lungs to move easily in the pleural cavity, which is the space between the parietal and visceral pleura. Pleural fluid. The function of the pleural fluid is to prevent friction between the lungs and the ribs when breathing. The pleural fluid is the body cavity that surrounds the lungs and is enclosed between the pleural cavity. The alveoli. The main function of the alveoli is the storage of air for a short period which permits absorption of the oxygen into the blood. The gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide typically takes place in the alveoli. The lobes. The lungs are divided by fissures into predictable arrangement of lobes. The right lung has the superior lobe, the middle lobe and the inferior lobe, whereas the left lung has the superior lobe and the inferior lobe. Each lobe has an independent function within the lung. The diaphragm. The intercostal muscles are those muscles found between the ribs. There are two kinds, the external and the internal. The external intercostal muscle responds to the contraction of the diaphragm, while the internal intercostal increases the pressure of the air-filled lungs. The intercostal muscles are essential in that they facilitate the action of breathing by expanding and shrinking the sides of the chest cavity. These muscles what make up the chest wall, and it is requisite mechanical function. The function of the respiratory system. The gaseous exchange is seen as the diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide which takes place in the lungs. is a biological process where organisms and the atmosphere exchange gases. Breathing is a result of the involuntary response mechanisms of the brain. As oxygen is essential to maintain an organism's existence, respiration is necessary as oxygen from each breath is rapidly integrated into the living system. It is then utilised and exhaled as carbon dioxide. This oxygen is captured in the lungs and then transferred to all parts of the organism by being transported through red blood cells. Inspiration is the breathing in of air, also called inhalation, and expiration is breathing out of air and also known as exhalation. The act of expiring is achieved in humans by elevation of the chest walls and annihilation of the diaphragm. Lung volume refers to the amount in percentage of air that the lungs can hold at once. The lung volume of individuals varies from one to the other based on lifestyle, size, age and underlying conditions. Tidal volume is when we breathe involuntarily and are just breathing normally and not making any conscious effort to breathe in a specific way. When a person takes the deepest breath they can and expels it, and expel it all, the amount of air that they are able to take in at one time is called the vital lung capacity. Residual volume is the amount of gas remaining in the lungs after maximal expiratory exhalation. Neural centers in the brain stem set the pace via the phrenic and intercostal nerves. The mechanism itself is the diaphragm. It contracts, expanding the volume within the lungs. There are also chemoreceptors in the brain and the heart that sense the amount of oxygen, carbon dioxide and acid present in the body. As a result, they modulate the respiratory rate to compensate for any disruptions in balance of these chemicals. Too much carbon dioxide or acidity and too little oxygen cause the respiratory rate to increase, and vice versa. Carbon dioxide chemoreceptors are much more sensitive than oxygen chemoreceptors.